And now we have Matthew Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation, joining us live from Singapore. Matthew, talk to us in the context of the report on the line crash. I'd like to ask you how safety of airlines often gets compromised by trying to make air operations cheap.
You have to remember that most airlines, and this is really the dollar figure that people need to realize. Most airlines on an average flight, their profit level is about $5 US per passenger. Okay, and I was at a conference a few years ago, and I forget who it was that was speaking, but I remember what they said very clearly. They said most flights are a hamburger and a Coca-Cola away from losing money. So you have to remember that the profit margins on every flight, on every airline, and it doesn't matter if it's a low-cost carrier or a legacy carrier, the profit margins are very slim, and so they're always trying to save money wherever they can.
Matthew, tell us in terms of how can such mistakes like the Lion Air crash be avoided?
Well, you have to look at which mistakes we're talking about. Are we talking about Boeing's mistakes where, in my opinion, they put profit over people? Are we talking about mistakes where Boeing did not put the information about MCAS into the training manuals, and so the pilots actually really didn't know what they were doing, which in a way was not really their fault? Are you talking about mistakes where the maintenance people for Lion Air didn't stop the plane that crashed? Actually,
lastly, in your opinion, since the report is out, how come so many mistakes were made by so many stakeholders in this?
Money. It all comes down to money. And I have a young son. I have a 15-year-old son, and I as I raise him, I keep telling him, and I'm a journalist, and what you say in journalism is you follow the money. And that's what I tell my son as well. I said, I tell him that most bad things that are done, or most, all of these things, it's because of money. And in this particular case, it was because of money. Boeing is in competition with Airbus. Airbus had just rolled out the A320, and Boeing needed a plane that could compete with the A320. And the fastest way, the quickest way to compete with the A320 was to re-engine the 737, which is a 50-year-old aircraft. Everybody needs to remember that. It's a 50-year-old aircraft. So they put some bigger engines on it, they beefed up the nose wheel, and they said, we got a new plane. So that's what happened. And it was because Boeing needed to compete with Airbus, and they needed to sell airplanes. And remember, this is back around 2010 or so, when we were on a huge upcycle of people were buying airplanes. All the low-cost carriers, all the Indian carriers were buying hundreds of airplanes. It all comes down to money.
Matthew Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation, joining us live from Singapore. Thank you, Matthew, for being with us here on Wion Fine Print.